Today is the fifth Sunday of Easter. Our text is taken from the Gospel of John, chapter 14, verses 1 through 12. I'd like to approach that text by referring to the German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer. You would perhaps be more familiar with Bonhoeffer as an opponent of Nazism and Adolf Hitler during the Second World War. He, in fact, was executed not long before Hitler himself committed suicide, because Bonhoeffer was part of a group that was plotting the assassination of Hitler. But Bonhoeffer was also a profound and significant Christian thinker. He has a very fine insight into the book of Genesis, the story of the fall, chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, that's particularly pertinent to today's gospel. Bonhoeffer points out that the original state of being for human beings is a state of unity. Oneness with God, oneness with self, oneness with creation, oneness with other human beings. That all changes. That unity becomes disunity, disconnection. When the source of evil lures humanity to eat the fruit which will give them knowledge of good and evil. You might say, but surely that's a good thing to know right from wrong, to know what is good rather than evil. In this context, it is the beginning of a radical shift away from God. Because if I am in charge, and I do in fact become in charge when I know what is right and what is wrong, I don't have to refer to God. I don't have to rely on God. I've begun a journey of disconnection and disunity. And that is the sad lot of humanity. That the original sin, if you want to call it that, was to choose the tree which put us in charge. We became as gods. Now in today's gospel, we meet Thomas again. Remember, we've met Thomas earlier this Easter when he demanded to touch the wounds of Jesus. In so doing, he was bearing witness to the incarnation in a very profound way, that the incarnation involved the God enfleshed in Jesus of Nazareth going to the absolute limits of humanity, the extremity of a horrific death. Thomas, in effect, in John's portrayal, is saying, look, here is the glory of God manifest in the wounded flesh of Jesus of Nazareth. But in today's gospel, John has Thomas speak for us all in a way. Jesus says to the disciples, I'm going away and you can come later. Thomas speaks up and says, how can we come? We don't know the way. Fair enough. Who wants to go on a journey when you don't know where you're going? Just as there are echoes here of the fall, Genesis 3 through 1 through 5, there's also echoes of the Exodus event. Where does God take the people when they are liberated from Egypt? They are taken into the wilderness, the uncharted places. There are no maps. If you are to survive in the desert, if you are to reach the promised land, you must depend on the one who has the map. Jesus says to Thomas, I am the map. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. Thomas, in effect, is asking for directions. Wants Jesus to outline how to get there. Give us strategies, give us formulae. And Jesus says it's about communion, intimacy, Thomas. It's a relationship. That's what faith is. Don't reduce it to a moral program. Throughout Christian history, especially in our Catholic tradition, that tendency to reduce the Christian life to a moral program has tended to dominate our thinking, sadly. It's a very destructive way to think of what is the magnificent gift on offer through divine revelation. Jesus doesn't come to us as someone giving us directions. He comes as someone inviting us into a relationship. We can distinguish that moralistic approach, for all its destructiveness, from the approach that calls to mind the communion of life that is on offer in Jesus, who is the absolute, the quintessential communion of life, of the divine and the human. Come, be part of my life. Form a relationship with me. Let your life be shaped by my being. When we reduce Christianity, or say Christianity is mostly about doing the right thing, we make ourselves very vulnerable to a simplistic thinking that says, if I do the right thing, then God will reward me. If I do the wrong thing, God will punish me. I do not believe that is what is on offer in Jesus Christ. I'm going to conclude this very brief reflection with a quotation from St. Paul's letter to the Romans, and then a couple of questions. In Romans chapter 6, verses 3 through 4, St. Paul says, "Do you not know that all of us who have been baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death?" So it's a communion in the Paschal mystery, in Jesus passing over from death to life, the great expression of God's love. St. Paul goes on, "Therefore, we have been buried with him by baptism into death, so that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in newness of life." The newness of life, the Christian moral life, is the fruit of the Christian mystical life. The mystical heart of our faith will shine forth in love, compassion, patience, kindness, self-control, the fruits of the Spirit, in other words. What has been your experience of being taught about the Christian life? What do you think is the essence of the Christian life? What do you think matters most about the energy and commitment to the Christian life?